There are two very important quotes that I'm going to break down for you in this video, which if you understand and which you begin applying at a higher level, your life will become far more successful. The first quote is, how you do one thing is how you do all things. And this is really true. If you're lackluster in one area, chances are you're lackluster in all areas. But also when you raise your minimum standard in key areas, when you start doing things focused on quality over quantity, then you start increasing the quality of all things. This is something I've learned as an author. For example, in the past, I was a lot more focused on quantity than quality. And so I would just crank out a lot of blog posts and I was fine with typos and stuff. But over time, I've really learned to raise the standard, raise the floor, and focus on quality, much higher quality than quantity. And so this has led me to much higher levels of refinement. There's actually a great quote on this from the author, James Clear. If you were to just go through something, for example, something you wrote, an email you wrote, one more time, and just look at it one more time and refine it one more time, polish it one more time, you will look a lot smarter than the other person, even though you're not smarter, just simply because you went over it one more time. I actually recently applied this idea with shaving. When you shave once, there's still some things you miss. And so I now shave twice, where I literally put on the shaving cream, shave once, fully get it, wash it off, and then put the shaving cream back on. It's crazy how smooth it is the second time, but how you just make it that 3 to 5% better, that higher level of refinement on anything you do. That is the first quote, that how you do one thing is how you do all things. Most people are focused on low quality and lots of quantity. So for example, the type of food you eat. Most people have a pretty low standard for the type of food they eat. They also have a low standard for the type of information they consume, and they consume random and also high quantity of information. So they don't have a really tight filter for what they let in. And once you start raising your standard and really getting clear on your future self, you have a much higher standard. And your standard, by the way, and your identity are the same thing. Your minimum standard is what you're most committed to as a person, and the results and the life you have as a person is based on what you're most committed to in terms of your minimum standard. Once you also get clear on your future self and you set that as a minimum standard, you focus on less but better, higher quality, less quantity. Using the 80-20 principle, you focus on the 20% of things that matter and you make those 10 times higher quality, such as your relationships, your health, your finances, your craft, your skill. You focus on a few things and then you filter out everything else. You let in less information, you let in less people, you're a lot more choosy about the types of experiences you have, and you ultimately have a much higher filter and you say no to a lot more. So how you do one thing is how you do all things. As you become more and more successful, you focus your attention on less and you focus it on going deeper. You focus on bigger opportunities. One of my favorite books on this topic is Catching the Big Fish. And he talks all about how when you go deep, you can catch massive fish. Your consciousness and your creativity are like the ocean. If you're up at the surface, all you see is small fish. And once you go really deep, you can start catching fish that are 50, 100 times, 1,000 times bigger, but your attention is focused on less but better. It's focused on higher quality. And so most people's attention is focused on quantity. They're all over the place. They're distracted by 1,000 things, and their brain and their mind is like a computer with 50 open tabs. And so it's literally draining their cognitive load, and it's burning out their system. And so what you want to do is you want to remove those things, close those loops, close those tabs, and have less on your attention so that you can go deeper, so that you can have higher quality and less quantity of all things. So that's principle number one, higher quality, less quantity. How you do one thing is how you do all things. Once you start raising your minimum standard, then ultimately you'll start raising your standard on all things, and you'll start having a much higher level of refinement and quality and intention and nuance in what you do rather than randomness. Now, the second one that fits very powerfully with this is a quote from Benjamin Franklin. He said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. This is, again, another lesson that I'm learning very dramatically. As someone who's written and launched multiple books, I'm seeing that my books could have been a lot more successful if I had more thoughtfully and thoroughly planned and executed not only the launch, but the type of book I wrote, and really just going through the process of planning. And so if you're not meticulously and effectively planning your future self, and maybe even some specific big win, call it in the next 6 to 12 months, if you're not planning effectively that far ahead, then your current process is not effective. In the past, I knew that it's really smart to start planning the launch, even if I'm not done writing the book. It's really smart to start planning the launch almost a year out. And that might sound crazy to a lot of people. And as a rule, most people think about your paper, like if you're in college, usually we procrastinate until the last minute. But if you're super planned ahead, then you can really raise the quality and you can really strategize and get certain wins that may make a massive difference. And when you start going for bigger things, when you start going for bigger fish, when you start going for bigger opportunities, when your goals start getting a lot higher, then the planning and the thoughtfulness, the foresight becomes a lot more important. And so because my minimum standard and because the quality and the expectation I have is much higher, I'm going to have to plan a lot more thoughtfully and a lot more meticulously. And I can take my past experience and see that in the past, some of my launches were lackluster, right? But what's really interesting is that when you really start planning effectively the success of something, it also impacts how you create something. And so because I'm already planning a massive, really powerful launch and putting amazing things in place, it's actually getting me really excited about wanting to really make this book by far the best book ever, because I'm already planning how to launch it to the moon. I guess what I would say is once you start really having a team and you start really going for big things, you want to start thinking much further ahead and planning a lot more effectively and planning a lot more successfully. And how you do one thing is how you do all things. If you're not planning very effectively in your health, you're probably not planning very effectively in your finances, and you're probably not planning very effectively for that next project. Everything you do may be a bit lackluster, last minute, just fly by the seat of your pants. But as you start becoming a lot more intentional and a lot higher quality and a lot more refined and a lot more professional and even masterful at what you do, then not only are you masterful at what you do, but you're masterful in how you plan and actually effectively succeed at things. And so I ask you genuine questions. What in your future is a massive peak experience that you're planning for? If you're a novice, you don't have to do much planning. But if you're a professional, you have to really plan things out. Think about the best tennis players in the world. They're planning now for their matches a year from now. And they're really thinking about, and they're like reverse engineering and planning on when they'll peak. They're not just showing up and being random. They're being very thoughtful and planning deeply ahead. And so what is something up in your future that is a huge thing that you could go for? Equivalent to me launching a book that maybe if you got really serious about it, you could start planning now, start putting really big pieces in place, start making what I would call 10x moves. How you do one thing is how you do all things. And if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. The more you focus on quality over quantity, and the more you raise your minimum standard, the more you're doing less but better, and the more you're ultimately effectively planning out and setting up things for success, not only for yourself, but for your team. So my question for you is, how are you doing on that? What are you currently planning for and essentially reverse engineering and scheming on and setting up? And are you setting up something with massive upside? And are you planning on something? And are you putting things in place that are going to lead to much bigger results? I can just tell you flatly and bluntly that when that book comes out, and it's called How to Stretch Time, I'm writing it right now. When that book comes out, it is going to be a much better and more successful launch than anything I've ever had, because I've never deeply and effectively and successfully planned with a really good team a launch that far ahead. But by planning that launch, it really is cranking me up in terms of my intrinsic motivation, my desire, my happiness to write the best book ever, because I want it to be good, because I'm already scheming and planning and setting up a launch that's going to be huge. And so I want it to be really good. So I hope that you can use this principle, these two principles, doing less but better. One thing, the same way you do everything, having your attention be deep so you're catching bigger fish, and ultimately that you're setting yourself up for success. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And that when you become more and more successful, you're a lot more thoughtful, a lot more intentional about the details, and that you're planning for massive success on few things rather than lackluster last minute on many things. I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy. If you have not yet read my book, 10X is Easier Than 2X, please grab it on Amazon. If you have read it, would you please leave an honest review? Thanks, and I'll see you in the next episode.